Picture, if you will, a dragon. Think of its scales, its wings, the shape of its legs or the lack thereof. Think of what a dragon is. Now stop. You are probably thinking of something like this. A dragon of European myth, breathing fire outwards into the air, something like what St. George slew. Maybe something like Dr. Richard Garfield's Shivan dragon. Maybe you pictured a more wuxia theme, something like the well-known symbol of the Emperor of China, maybe similar to the legendary dragons of Kamigawa Block. Either way, the image still present in your mind likely has a few united characteristics. It probably has some part of a large feline, almost definitely includes iconic wings, and it would be safe to bet that it has snake-like scales or the leathery hide of a lizard. Dragons are found across the globe, popping up often enough that it seems possible that the creatures truly can move from continent to continent with wings or fins or elemental power to show up in countless cultural contexts. But dragons aren't real. In fact, most monsters aren't real, so why are they just about everywhere? And why do we think about them the way that we do? The first thing we need to talk about when considering monsters is their origin. And considering how prevalent dragons are, they seem as good a monster as any to use as an example. Now, there's a few theories as to why human cultures across the globe have an infatuation with the winged beasts, but most of them fall into one of two separate categories, as well as the idea of dragons really existing. But that doesn't quite count. This is Red Dragon, a painting by abstract artist Mylan Todd. It's a liquid painting and it wasn't sketched out, printed, or traced, but it still looks like a dragon. And while the description on the sales site itself is reason enough to look at the painting, the reason I'm showing this is to show that your instinct probably recognizes these various shapes as a dragon. See, the first hypothesis is dragons stemming from within the human mind, proposing the idea that these monsters exist more in our instinct to fight predators than the world around us. And anthropologist David E. Jones's An Instinct for Dragons, he presents the theory that dragons stem from ancestral memory of danger and the instinct we have to avoid predators. He argues that dragons aren't a mislabeled fossil or a myth we keep telling each other again and again and again, but instead an amalgamation of common traits in the animals we humans fear the most. The wings of a terrifying raptor, the claws of a feline predator, the scales and shape of a snake, and in some cases other features from other animals. The monsters of Greek mythology demonstrate this theory succinctly, with the chimera, a literal mix of different animals, or the chaedia, a monster that despite not having the traits of a dragon, still incorporates a mix of marine predators into one creature. Predators that many could argue were more important to be wary of in a culture of seafarers. This theory is attractive to us because it presents the idea that dragons in a way are within us and inherent in our nature. But the theory doesn't have the strongest base of evidence backing it up, and it sure as hell would be impossible to truly demonstrate and prove within actual human beings. The alternative thesis here is dragons stemming from the bones of monsters within our real world. And while monsters here can be used nebulously, I'm more referring to a couple creatures that seem just very dragon-y. Dinosaur fossils are one of the most compelling pieces of evidence of gargantuan reptilian monsters. Some of them even have preserved wings, which, adds another bonus point to the theory. Reportedly, a Chinese historian in the 4th century BC once even mislabeled a dinosaur fossil as dragon bones. Some folks think that dragons originate from the Nile crocodile, which can reportedly get up to 18 feet in length when mature, which, large. The last creature, which is often attributed to the origin of dragons, is whales. Their gargantuan bones often seem similar to the Chinese dragon archetype, and they spend like 90% of their life underwater, so it's believable that people wouldn't know enough about them to recognize their bones at the time. The only issue with this theory is that it is, once again, effectively impossible to prove, despite having a lot more evidence behind it. Now, the third hypothesis is that dragons really exist, which is, when it comes down to it, just wrong. Like, not even a little bit right, just all wrong. It seems like most of the people arguing this are just there for clickbait shock value arguments, but it is an alternative to the first two ideas, so I should probably mention it. From whichever angle you look at it, dragons are effectively a big mishmash of creatures that humanity decided was actually one big scary creature, which brings us to the apexes of Ikoria, and more importantly, this set's new keyword, mutate. When first looking at the apex of the set combined with their mythos, it felt off for the legendary monsters that have been around since the beginning of time to have the mutate keyword. If I make a squirrel token with Deep Forest Hermit and then mutate Vadrock onto the squirrel, now Vadrock's the squirrel, and the squirrel is an apex of Ikoria. It feels flavorfully bereft of sense, like the Magic the Gathering equivalent of mayonnaise, but it's not. And hear me out here as I try to dig wizards out of their gradually deepening hole of creating flavor that often falls incredibly flat. It's because they aren't real creatures. They are their own mythos. In the same way that the Greek Leviathan could be any whale, the same way that the Loch Ness Monster could be any log along a lake, and the same way that the Chupacabra could just be a wolf sighted in the dimming light of the evening sunset, the apexes are a conglomeration of culture and instinct, a mix of myth and fear, and the creatures we see pounding against the walls of Drannith every single day. In the same way, the mutate keyword and the ability tokens are equally relevant, a literal and mechanical representation of the blending of creatures together. Each creature in Ikoria is fundamentally different. Each creature is its own blend of monstrosity, myth, and instinct. And just because the Ozolith is doing that blending instead of our own mind, doesn't mean the significance of the blending is lost. But Ikoria seems to dismiss one of the most important things about how we see monsters, the cultural division of them. Ikoria has one of the strongest representations of the origin of monsters that I've found in a monster-centric setting, but it doesn't wish to address the way that different cultures view the creatures we've created in our heads. And to really understand that division, we have to go back to our example of dragons. It really comes down to two different basic models of what a dragon is. The Chinese dragon, which spread to most of the rest of Asia, or the European dragon. And while there's a vast amount of other types of dragons ranging for a ton of separate cultures, from Greek to Native American to African, these two are the most widespread and the most iconic, as well as having the most obvious differences. Now they both of course maintain the patchwork of cats, snakes, and raptors to form the animalistic base of dragons, and they both come with the feeling of being a powerful and terrifying creature. But as a whole, the two cultures seem to have one distinct divide. European dragons are beasts to be slain, while Chinese dragons seem like more of something to look up to, embodying regality and being an iconic symbol of the Chinese emperor. A slithering shape leaves a large dark shadow from overhead, long whiskers and a wavy mane defining the features of a cat-like face atop a snake-like body. The origins of the Chinese dragon are commonly disputed, but one of the most iconic myths details that the Yellow Emperor conquered 9 tribes along the Yellow River Valley, and incorporated each creature together into one totem, a story both incorporating the idea of the Chinese emperor being powerful, and the reason that a dragon is such a symbol for that emperor. Another myth details the idea that the dragon is an incorporation of the best features from a large variety of different animals, creating an ideal creature famously endowed with godlike powers in addition to the features combined by all of the beasts. The Chinese dragon is considered a powerful monster to respect and attribute honor to, a bringer of high harvest yield, especially including control over water, the tide, and rainfall within agriculture. They're a symbol of power. They're classically lucky and virtuous, not something to be slain, and I think that aspect is especially relevant in the design of Kamigawa's cycle of legendary dragons. Slaying them is inherently bad, and it comes with inherent consequences. Maybe you'll lose life, or perhaps your villagers will be punished with a bout of flame. This cycle, despite not being the strongest, is packed full of that sweet, sweet flavor. European dragons, however, are a little bit different in nature. Fire-breathing monsters packed full of spite and necessary to slay. The fire-breathing here is represented mechanically on Shivan Dragon, with the mechanic often colloquially known as fire-breathing. It's a threat, and threats get slain. The origin of the dragon can usually be associated with Greek myth. There are a few heroes of Hellenistic mythos that haven't slain the iconic monster or something similar to it. Hercules and Perseus are among the most well-known, but anyone that killed a sea monster or a hydra also can be added to the long list of dragon slayers. Now, the more medieval dragon slaying motif stems from the iconic St. George and the Dragon. And weirdly enough, King Arthur's tales only really have one dragon, and it's slain off-screen by Lancelot, which, honestly, is kind of boring. Now, the original dragon-slaying myth seems to be the Tales of Kur from ancient Sumeria. These myths come from about the 1st millennium BC, and it seems to be the first instance of a dragon in recorded history. They tell a story about a monster that ravages the land and is slain by a mythical hero with a big spear. Now, Ikoria doesn't put weight on the cultural divide of how different groups view monsters in the real world, and while their representation of the amalgamation of monsters is incredibly well done, they don't seem to want to address the cultural significance of the way we view our monsters. The way the human brain cobbles together a dragon like a patchwork coat, the way we assume that the glance of a whale in the water is a sea monster, the way we rationalize the scraps of animals through the branches of trees, we see monsters as something big and powerful. For the European breed, there's something to kill. For the Asian breed, there's something to revere. But it doesn't really matter what you do with these monsters, because they don't exist. What matters is the way you think about these monsters. And that's why the apexes of Ikoria are so great. They are monsters at their purest form, and despite the aesthetic flair of kaiju culture, the apexes don't lean towards any cultural context. Ikoria is a plane about monsters, and the apexes are the most monster a monster can be. And that, I think at least, is why the apexes are kind of genius, and definitely important, despite not really appearing in Ikoria's storyline. I have to admit, the title was kind of a trick. The way we view monsters isn't very important. It's the way our subconscious does. We look for monsters regardless of whether they're here at all. We build monsters from what scares us most, and the apexes aren't truly creatures themselves. They're a representation of how Ikoria's culture views their monsters, and how Ikoria's culture manifests that.